Hello and welcome. My name is Pastor Dave. I hope that you had a great Christmas and a good New Year. We are back. We are starting something new. We're going to be looking at the story over the next month of the 12 spies. And if you're unfamiliar with it, you'll get familiar with it. But it is a story of the Israelites as they have left Egypt and wandered in the desert, and Moses dies. Joshua is now in command, and they're about ready to take the promised land, and he sends some spies into the promised land to kind of scope things out, right? And so we're going to look at that story and draw some really cool lessons from that. And the series is called Of 10 or 2, Which Spies Do You Trust? Now, as we look at this, what we're really doing, or part of what we're doing, is we are kicking off the new year, and we're going to be challenging each other to kind of ask that question: what do we want to see God do in 2024? And do we believe the promises of God? Will we trust in the promises of God? And do we know the promises of God? And what verses do we cling to that speak to us the promises of God? And so we're going to kind of go through all of that stuff. But today we gotta travel back a little further, because we can't go right to the story of the 12 spies. We need to know the promises that they believed, and it sets the context for that story. So we're gonna actually start back in Genesis 12, and we're gonna look at Abraham. And it's important to know the context of the story that's going to take place with the spies, and so this is going to give us that. Now, do you have any routines? I'm sure most of us do. What are some of the routines you have in life? And maybe it's a breakfast routine, maybe it's a work routine, maybe it's how you like to relax. There's a certain routine, a certain rhythm. What are those things? And what happens if it gets disrupted? So, Genesis 12. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country." Now, Abram, that's his name. Currently, God will change it to Abraham in the story. But the Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and he headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At that time, the area was inhabited by the Canaanites. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your descendants." And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord who had appeared to him. And so this is the beginning of the story. And Abraham is, like God said, "I'm going to make you famous." And of course, we're still talking about the guy, and like half the world talks about him or knows of him. So he's pretty famous. Like you have, I don't know if Jesus is the most famous person to live. Abraham is definitely top 5. And we see that God speaks to him and says, pack up and move. Now he's 75. I'm not 75 yet, but I can't imagine having this major life disruption at 75. And so we see right away in the story that God disrupts old routines with new objectives. And as we kick this year off, I want to challenge you to be ready for God to disrupt your routines this year. Be willing to allow God to disrupt your old routines and to give you some new objectives. He's been preparing you. And like the story that's going on with Abram, he comes to him and the first thing that has to happen is Abram's got to be willing to have his old routine, his old way of doing things, his old place, all of that had to be uprooted, had to be disrupted. And then we see this cool thing that happens in this story is he just does it. Like God says, go, I'm gonna send you to this other place. You're gonna have to leave all your old routines. You're gonna have to leave all of your relatives, your father's family, and go to the land I'm gonna show you. Like he doesn't even know where he's going. It's not like today where we often can look on a map or look on GPS and we know where we're going and how long it takes to get there, and we have the travel method, we have it mapped out. Abram had none of that. Yet, he just did it. God said, I'm going to send you someplace. I'm going to leave here. And it just says, so Abram departed as the Lord had instructed. He just did it. When we believe the promise, we pack our bags before we know the destination. When I was in college, there was this student. He was older, and he's from Africa, and I believe his father had passed away, and so he was going to have to go back for a funeral, and but he didn't have the money. He didn't have the means to kind of unexpectedly purchase a plane ticket. He wasn't ready for that. And when we kind of heard that was going on campus, we kind of wondered, like, what's he going to do? We kind of felt bad for him, like he needs to fly back, and and we kind of wondered, and then we were kind of wondering, like, where is he actually? And when he found out he needed to go, he went to his dorm. And now he was married and had a family, but he came to the U.S. on a visa and was training to be a pastor and stuff like that. And he was in his dorm room, and he packed his suitcase to go. He didn't have a ticket yet. He just went down to the dorm room, packed his bags, and began to pray. And just trusted that God would meet his need. And of course, God did, and somebody had purchased him a plane ticket, but he just went down and packed his bag and trusted God. Abram doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't know the destination yet. He doesn't know where he's taking his family. He's 75. He's undoubtedly had a life where he's built routines, and now God disrupts all of that and says, I'm going to send you to this new land, and he just packs up and goes. In Genesis 15, it says, sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great. But Abram replied, O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You've given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir. Then the Lord said to him, no, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. Then the Lord told him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession. But Abram replied, O sovereign Lord, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it? And the Lord said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And so we see that it says sometime later, there have been some years, some time that have passed, and Abram is like, God is, I uprooted my whole life. I moved my family, my household, everything. And it wasn't like he could just pack a U-Haul, right? Different time. And he's traveled to a foreign country and now he's beginning to wonder, like, God has told me that my descendants are going to possess this land, but I don't have any descendants. I don't have a son. I don't have any kids. And so he's beginning to wonder, like, God, what are you up to? How's this going to work out? Like, Abram is just kind of doing the math, right? And God shows him the sky and says, look at the stars. Like, I have this whole thing worked out, and you're going to have a descendant. Like, God's like telling him, just be patient, right? I've got it all planned out. And of course, it's hard for us to be patient with God sometimes because we don't know what God knows. So God said, look, I have a bigger plan. I have a bigger plan. I have it all worked out for you. You just got to trust me. And so he tells Abram to bring this cow and this goat and these animals. And God's about to do something cool. He's about to do something unique. He's about to make a covenant, make an agreement. He's about to make this promise to Abram. Verse 10 says, so Abram presented all these to him and killed them. Then he cut each animal down the middle and laid the halves side by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. Verse 11. Some vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. Now, that verse that I just read, verse 11, it's just kind of part of the story. It seems like that's just you cut up some animals and you're out in like maybe some deserty places because the vultures there and the vultures, right? They're just coming down to eat the dead animal. That's what vultures do. But I think that verse is included not just to give us the information, right? The information is good, but there's something there I want to key in on. You gotta picture what's going on. God is about to make this covenant with Abram. He's about to, in a very real way, through this ceremony, this covenant ceremony, he's about to, as if his spoken words to Abram weren't enough, he is about to cement the promise with this covenant. And as Abram has prepared the animals, and this is, you can, if you want to look up and read about how they did covenants back then, this isn't a thing that Abram would have been unfamiliar with. Like, this was kind of how some covenants happened, and they would sacrifice animal, like the animals, they were the losers in the covenant, but they'd sacrifice animals, and there's this whole process to it, and this whole big ceremony to it. And as Abram has it prepared, the vultures start coming. And the vultures swoop down to eat the animals. And the problem is those animals are part of this covenant and are an important part of what God is doing in cementing this promise with Abram. And so he chases the vultures away. He's chasing away the disruption to the covenant that God is making. And I think that there's this lesson to be learned in that this year, as we draw near to God, as we lean in, as we listen to the promises of God, as we claim the promises of God, I'm here to tell you that the vultures will swoop down. There will be distractions to the promise of God. There will be vultures who will come and try to steal the promise from you. There will always be vultures to chase away. God is going to show up and be faithful, and He has made promises. You know, in the Bible, there are some scholars and people who, when they examine Scripture, they say that the Bible contains around 7,000 promises, 7,000 statements where God tells humanity, I will do this, I will do this, I will do this, I am good. So the Bible is full of these promises, full of these declarations, full of this covenant language. And here we're actually reading the covenant story where God is making a promise to humanity and making a promise specifically to Abram here in this spot. And when it happens, the vultures swoop down to try to steal the promise, to try to disrupt the promise, to try to distract us from the promise. And as you ask God to reveal some promises to you, as you seek God in that way, as you begin to believe the promises, as you memorize some Bible verses that are promises that speak to you, the vultures will come. The negative thoughts will come. The whispers in your ear that God's not faithful. The whispers in your ear that, yeah, God is good to everybody else, but you don't deserve it. The whispers that say, look, of course He made a promise to Abram. He had faith. He was obedient, but look at what you've done in the past. Right? The vultures will come. The vultures will try to steal the promise. The vultures will try to disrupt the covenant that God is making with us. And we have to chase the vultures away. Verse 12. As the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. And as for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. After 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites do not yet warrant their destruction." So Abram falls asleep, and God is speaking to him, and he tells him, he's laying out the history of his people, that eventually your people are going to end up as slaves in Egypt, and after a time I'm going to deliver them from Egypt, and then they're going to come and possess this land. So this covenant that God is making with Abram is laying out what is history now, but what was future then of the people of Israel. And so over the coming weeks, when we look at the story of the 12 spies, we know the history behind that, and we know the promise that God is making. So when the spies and Joshua are at the doorstep of the promised land, it's called the promised land because of these verses, because of this story where God says, I'm going to give it to these people at this point in time. After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between the halves of the carcasses. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day and said, I have given this land to your descendants, all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River. And he lists all the different people who live there and makes that promise. Where will your faith take you this year? Abram's faith took him to a foreign land, took him to a place he'd never been, caused him to believe a promise of God. To believe for a long time before seeing it actually happen, right? He had to believe that he was going to have a son for years before it actually happened. God made this covenant with him about how his descendants would possess the land, and he didn't have a descendant yet. He had to take it on faith. Where will your faith take you this year? How will your faith shape this year? Will you believe the promise of God? Will you believe the promises that God is making to you? The last part of Hebrews 10:23 just says God can be trusted to keep his promise. So here's my challenge for you today. I'm not going to give you a set of verses that are promises God has made. I'm not doing that. You have to do that. My challenge for you is to look up some verses in the Bible that are promises God makes to his people. You can simply just Google Bible verse promises or however you want to phrase it, and you will find big lists of them. There are whole books written about the promises God makes to those who believe in him. And so my challenge for you, look up some of those verses this week. Begin to read the verses where God has made promises to us. Will you believe the promises of God? First, of course, you got to know what they are. So take some time. Read some promises. Begin to ask God to reveal to you what he's promising for you this year. Maybe there's a certain verse that you're going to cling to this year. Maybe there's just a phrase in that verse that God is just making a promise, and it's just going to set the tone for 2024. Maybe there's a certain thing that God is going to do in and through you in 2024, and this verse speaks to it. Find that verse. Read the just lists of promises from the Bible and see how God speaks to you through that. Will you believe the promises of God?